Portland just made one of the worst housing decisions I've ever seen, and it's going to wipe out the entire middle class. And this isn't just a headline grab, it's happening right now. Rents are skyrocketing, small landlords are quitting, and if you think this can't happen where you live, you're dead wrong. I know people that have owned real estate in Oregon and Washington and Portland, and they've sold it all. And after what they just did, I'll never invest in another city that makes this mistake. And if you care about your financial future or want your city to function, you need to hear this. So Portland just doubled down on restrictive zonings, green building mandates, and rent control. On paper, that sounds like that should help affordability, but it doesn't. It actually makes things worse. You know, I've got a property over in Washington that we bought before all of this started, and they just passed rent control in our area. And what we did is we saw every single landlord in the market take the full 10% that was allowed by law as a rent bump, because we all saw that if we didn't take the rent bumps this year, they weren't going to spill over to next year. And then we also saw housing that was going to be built that's been put on hold. I mean, on paper, this sounds like this helps. This sounds like this makes things go better. But the thing is, the more restrictive that the government becomes on developers, the higher the costs. And let's just be honest, all developers are trying to do is get a return on their investment. If they're having to spend a lot more money to do that same investment, then by default, they're going to have to charge a lot more rent. And investors and developers are pulling out of these markets. The reality is, when you see government overreach like this, it scares off the money. And when they leave, then that's not going to be good for anyone. Let's talk about some of the other real impacts of these policies on the middle class. Let's talk about who gets hurt first and how bad this can get. You know, if you think about it, if you're buying a value add apartment and you're thinking, you know what, I'm gonna go in, I'm gonna drop 30 grand on each unit, I'm gonna make them nicer, and I'm gonna turn the rents and I'm gonna turn them up. You can't do that when this happens because you're restricted on how much you can raise the rents. So you're gonna invest the $30,000, of which you'd like to see a $3,000 a year return, but if your rents were only $1,500, you can't raise them the first year. You can only raise them 10%, and so then you're stuck. You're not getting a return on your investment that's worth doing the first year or the second year. It's not until the third year that you're going to see any real funds that are going to pay you back for what you did. And that's where it gets worse, because instead of improving the units, instead of keeping them up to a current market level that would continue to advance your investment, you're going to do like what they've done in New York. You're going to ignore the buildings. You're going to have walk-ups that are 80 to 100 years old that no elevator's been put in because nobody will pay the additional rent. So you're still going to have the same old product. And that's going to be problematic. Meanwhile, the green mandates on housing is going to make those costs more expensive, ever widening the gap between renting and owning. And I don't see how that changes with these kinds of policies in place. In fact, the chasm will just get wider. Small landlords, we're getting out. We're looking at it going, I don't want to have anything to do with these policies because at the level that I operate in that state, I can't afford to affect policy that's clearly going against my investment. So at the end of the day, I'm simply going to leave. I'm going to sell. I'm going to sell it to whoever's buying, which is probably a guy that knows what's happening. And we won't call him a slumlord, but somebody that's not going to do anything to upkeep the building, that keep things happening. You know, the funny thing is that city leaders sit there and say that these rules protect renters and they keep housing affordable. You can't show me one area that this has happened, that the level of housing has stayed at the level it was when the law was passed, and it's kept things more affordable. But from my perspective, those that benefit aren't the landlords and they aren't the tenants. And those are the people that are getting crushed the most, is the tenants, in how the world is treating them and how things are happening in their state. So if Portland is a no-go for smart investors, where does that opportunity move to? Well, my strategy's always been, and it keeps getting reaffirmed, that you need to build your wealth in cities that start with the right kind of processes. Cities that are landlord friendly, cities that allow you to improve your units, that don't try and control what you build. because the reality is inflation is a tax on the middle class because it keeps eating and evaporating all the wealth that they can choose to create. So when you start to see these things, you want to make sure that you're getting into markets that are proactive, they're pro-growth, they're pro-building, and they're there to provide value. Look, let's just be honest. Landlords only charge what the market will bear. And that's why they're not building in areas like this, because the market will not sustain and will not pay a return on the investment if they invest all the funds that are necessary to build somewhere like Portland. So it's important that you stay ahead of these policies because they are a risk to your investment. When I started in Washington, it was just King County that had rent control. Now they've made it the whole state, and I'm in the process of getting out. Look, I've built over $165 million worth of projects, and I've seen these policies backfire time and time again. And the more restrictive a city gets, the less people want to invest in it. It doesn't work out well. I've only been doing this for 30 years, and I've yet to see the policies work the right way one time. But this is what I'm warning investors to do, is don't ignore the signs. If you start to see a city or a state leaning one way or another that is definitely anti-landlord, don't stick around. Get out while you can so that you can have the best chance of success in a state and a city that actually wants you. You know, I've made a lot of partnerships happen in my local jurisdictions by becoming friends with those that are in power. And by saying those that are in power, those that are on planning and zoning commissions, those that are on city councils, those that are on the legislation of the state. And in that, I can help them to understand my perspective, because I do understand affordability. I do understand that it affects everybody. I mean, look, if the guys that are doing my plumbing are having to pay a huge amount for rent, they've got to get a bigger wage. And if they have to get a bigger wage, then it's going to cost me more to get my buildings done. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that we need to enact these policies, in fact, that really are detrimental. Free market needs to be the driving factor here. And if that's not what's happening in the states that you're operating in, I really highly suggest you take a look at moving your operations elsewhere. Move your real estate holdings. I know it's a pain in the butt, but I think it's something you definitely need to do. Look, if you're wondering where to put your money right now, don't guess. I'll show you how to build scalable wealth in the right markets. So book a call with me. The link's below. And if you watch this video till the end, you will definitely want to watch the next video on how to pay zero in taxes. You can watch it here. It's on the screen right now.